Hey guys, Gamer C here. Welcome back to a new video. Sorry I've been gone for so long, it's just I've been in the process of moving. I just moved back to the United States. Well, today I'll be reviewing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which is one of my favorite video games of all time. And I personally think that it's up there with the best I've ever played. Fate of Atlantis, The Stanley Parable, and The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Well, it may not be as good as all three of these games, but however, it is definitely up there. Indiana Jones is a franchise with 4 great movies: Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Temple of Doom, The Last Crusade, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. 4 great movies. There we go. That's much better. There's also Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, and Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, which are all video games. And personally, I think all of them are great, just as the 4 Indiana Jones movies are great. It may be controversial that I like Staff of Kings and Crystal Skull, but I personally think that those 2 are great. Without further ado, let's get into it. Oh, the story begins in Peru, during the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. A lot of people don't like the fact that it, had the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I personally think that, it was pretty good. However, I get their criticisms. I personally think that making an original intro might have been better. Well, anyways, Indy runs into this guy named Satipo, and the 2 of them enter a temple. However, little does Indy know, Satipo is planning to stab him in the back. Anyways, here's how he looks in the movie, just to show you how realistic it is. Oh, by the way, guys, the reason why I haven't been uploading recently is because I've been in the process of moving. I moved out of France, and I moved back to the United States, and I will be living on the East Coast, which is why I've been gone for so long. I also, at the time of recording this video, have not been on Instagram or TikTok recently as well, because I've been so busy. Well, I've just settled on the East Coast in Pennsylvania, and now I have enough time to make this video. I will return to TikTok and Discord as soon as I settle fully. Well, anyways, since I have limited editing software, I don't have access to my footage on my computer. So this whole view will be in screenshots and photos. Well, anyways, we reach the end of the temple and find a golden idol. We see Indy take the idol, and he triggers a trap mechanism. So the whole temple begins to collapse. After this, Indy and Satipo then run, and Satipo steals the idol and betrays Indy, leaving him to die. However, Satipo gets caught in a trap and ends up dying, and Indy takes the idol back. After this, we see him escape the temple, and Indy ends up waking up, and it all turns out to be a dream. I personally think that this sequence says a lot, as it shows that Indy still hasn't let go of these events, despite it being a full year later. Well, anyways, Indy wakes up and finds out that somebody broke into the college, Barnett College, which is the college that he works at, and he ends up finding a giant named Locust. And he ends up defeating Indy and knocking him out, and then he takes the cat mummy. As soon as Indy finds this out, he finds the giant's medallion, and he takes it with him, realizing that this is a Vatican pendant. We then see him travel to Italy, more specifically Vatican City, which is technically not considered a part of Italy, but you know what I mean. We then see Indy purchase a camera, and then after this we see Indy take some pictures of murals around the city. However, this isn't a side quest, it comes back into the story later. And when Indy's friend, Antonio, who we meet earlier, finds these photos, he then examines them and realizes that the next place that they have to go to is the Tower of Nicholas V. After this, we see Indy go through a temple, and he ends up discovering a woman named Gina. And at first it doesn't seem like she will come back into the story later, but however she does. She reveals that her sister, Laura Lombardi, who is an expert in ancient languages, and she gets described as a very smart and caring character. After this, we see Indy go to another temple, full of lots of dragons and fire and other stuff, and by the end of all of it, we encounter a guy named Loki, and he then fights Indy again. However, this time, Indy wins, and he finds his cat mummy. However, then Voss comes in, and we hear him talking about the Great Circle and its power. However, after having a conversation with Father Ventura, who has been working with Voss the whole time, he then destroys the cat mummy and pulls out a stone inside of it. After this, we see him as well as his team do this to a bunch of other relics, and they get 13 out of the 17 stones needed. And Voss makes it very, very clear that there are 4 more stones out there. After this, we see Indy and Gina team up and go and leave the Vatican. And the next location they go to is Giza. Indy ends up meeting somebody named Nawal. And we see them go into a Nazi base where we see them take down a Nazi flag in order to distract the Nazis. That way they can get into the base. And the reason why they're doing this is because they believe that Voss has notes about Laura. And when they finally get in, they find out that they are actually right about all this. And they eventually find clues about Gina's whereabouts, and they also discover that a battleship had gone missing, which is great foreshadowing. After this, we see Indy get further into the base with Gina, and we see Voss and his friend Gans, although he wasn't his friend at this time. Well, anyways, we see them argue with each other, and then Indy and Gina break in and hold Voss at gunpoint. We see Indy and Gina talk to Voss, where she asks him repeatedly where Laura is, and he continuously tries to manipulate her and Indy as well. However, after this, a fight goes on that ends with Indy knocking out Voss and Gans. After this, we see Indy and Gina escape the base, and we see Indy go to the Sphinx, where we see him solve a hieroglyphic message that factors into the story and reveals where the temple, where their next MacGuffin is located. After a while, Indy solves it and then goes to the temple. After this, Indy then enters a sound-filled chamber that mainly depends on sound. After he solves it, the floor opens up and he falls in. Then after this, we continue to make our way through the temple, and we eventually encountered a second giant. And this is what he looks like. However, this giant is blind, and as a result, you have to use stealth in order to defeat him. You have to crouch and hit him from behind or throw stuff at him, and eventually you defeat him. Oh, by the way, this entire temple sequence is great, full of so many different light puzzles and stuff. If I had to compare it to another dungeon that I've played before, I would say that it's very, very similar to the Lightning Temple from The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Well, anyways, so Indy defeats the giant and takes his pendant, and after this, the giant tells Indy not to say the name, which I never really got what he said when he said this. I never understood what he meant. It's clearly thrown in to set up intrigue and foreshadowing as well. However, I just never really got it. After this, Indy uses the pendant on a spot in the middle of the room, and it causes him to fall into a secret chamber. And there is the idol of Ra, and it has the next stone inside. Indy then destroys the statue and finds another stone inside. However, this triggers a sand trap where you have to jump repeatedly, and this eventually leads to a secret escape hatch where Indy escapes. I really like this whole sequence because it looks like a movie, but in first person. That is one thing that I absolutely have to give the game top marks for, and it's a real shame that I'm recording this on my phone and I have no footage to show. That really sucks. Well, anyways, I'm doing the best I can with what I have to work with. Well, anyways, after this, Indy ends up escaping the temple and encounters Voss. And Voss then takes the stone away from him. And Voss also tells Indy that he doesn't understand what the stones are really about. And this sends Indy into panic to learn what these stones are about. And then after this, lots of scorpions go over and attack Indy, and you have to repeatedly blow at them in order to get them away. However, after a while, Nawal and Gina come over and rescue Indy. And Gina ends up letting them know that while she was looking at the Nazi transmissions, she noted that they would be heading to the Himalayas, located in Nepal. So we head to Nepal. I heard a complaint about one YouTuber who said that Indy has already been to all these locations before in the movies, but however, I personally don't think that's necessarily a valid complaint. Indy also went to Nepal in Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings, and we also see him go to other locations as well, such as Sukhothai, located in Thailand. Well, anyways, Indy ends up heading to the Himalayas as he is learning the Adamic words that he spoke in the chamber. And after a while, we see Indy head to the Himalayas, where we see him encounter a battleship, which is really confusing at first because it's very, very far away from the ocean. In fact, Nepal is a landlocked country. Well, anyways, Indy and Gina end up going in, and they find out that the ship is completely frozen, and nobody is alive. And at first it seems like everything is all mostly normal here, but then they end up finding Gina's sister, Laura, dead on the ship. And in a very depressing way, Gina begins crying in a scene that is, honestly, one of the most depressing scenes I've seen in any video game. I still wouldn't say that it's the saddest scene I've seen in any video game, though. I honestly would say that title goes to the scene in The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom where Zelda becomes the Light Dragon. Although this scene is still definitely up there. I would say that it is still definitely sadder than a majority of scenes I've seen in video games that are meant to be sad. Well, anyways, Laura had her journal with her, and Indy and Gina end up taking it. And after this, we end up seeing Gina and Indy move forward through the ship where they find the stone. However, one thing that I do gotta praise before I get to that is there was one puzzle sequence on this ship that requires you to enter a code. And I really struggled at finding the answer to it. I struggled for over 20 minutes to find the answer. If you take enough photos of it, the game will give you enough hints to the point where you're able to find the answer. And as an individual who struggles with puzzles, I really appreciate that. Well, anyways, after this, Gansk comes in after Indy and Gina find the stone. And Gans, he proceeds to mock American culture and say a lot of other stuff. However, after this, a fight happens where Gina ends up handing Gans a grenade that is live, and Gans ends up throwing it over the edge, and it ends up exploding, causing the ship to fall down a mountain. Then after this next sequence feels like you're playing a video game in like a movie. It feels like a movie and a video game at the same time. I don't know how to describe it. But the ship goes downhill, and you have to make your way through all sorts of different obstacles to make your way to the back of the ship. Then after this, Indy and Gina are falling, and they end up realizing that the stone that they found earlier, can teleport. And Gina even speculates that that's how the ship got here. Then after this, we see Indy and Gina fall, and we see Indy say the word that causes the stone to work, and we see it teleport them all the way to the city of Shanghai. However, after this, Gans gets up, as it turns out that he survived, and he grabs a piece of debris and is about to stab Indy with it when suddenly glass falls and ends up killing him. Oh, by the way, guys, I just wanted to say that all these photos are from Google, so credits to Google for all of the photos. Well, anyways, another YouTuber ended up criticizing the way Gans dies, saying that it's a really underwhelming death for the story's secondary antagonist. However, I still don't think that one is the worst in the series, even though I kind of agree with him. Sure, it's nothing in comparison to the other villains, secondary villains, but however, I still personally think that Cheddar Lol from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom had a worse death. Like, him getting crushed by a wheel? Come on. Like, can you really do better than that? Well, anyways, after this, we end up seeing Indy and Gina get up, and we see them go through Shanghai as it's being bombed by Japanese forces. And after this, we eventually see them get to the rooftops where a plane is, And we see an escape sequence where Indy and Gina go on a plane, and they end up getting into a firefight with the Japanese forces. And after a while, we end up seeing Indy and Gina board another airplane. After this, Indy basically explains that the next stone is located in Shanghai. Oh, my bad, I mean Sukhothai, located in Thailand, which was a nice place to put it. Well, anyways, I really enjoyed the Nepal and Sukhothai sequences. I mean Shanghai. My bad. Well, anyways, I felt like they were interesting sequences that honestly felt like a movie. They were some great sequences. And Sukhothai is just as good. Well, anyways, after this, we end up seeing Gina and Indy go into a hotel, where Indy talks to Gina and tells her that he's sorry about Laura. And then later on, the two of them begin to talk about what they will do going forward. And we end up seeing Indy reference Marianne, which is quite sweet, knowing his love for her. Oh, by the way, this is before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, so this is before Indy and Marianne got married. However, I did find this to be quite interesting. Later on, the two of them get into a battle with the fascists as the fascists attack the hotel. After this, we see Indy escape with some friendly locals, one of which being a woman named Pylin. And after that, Indy has to pass a trial where he needs to prove his worth, which is essentially a jar where his worst fear will be inside. And however, the whole thing turns out to be a trick, and it results in a sequence that is quite funny. However, after this, Indy and Gina end up going to a temple with a gear puzzle that splits the mountain. And after you finish that, Indy and Gina then arrive at the temple. My bad, it's late at night, and I'm quite tired, so I am having a little bit of a speech delay. Well, anyways, they end up going into the temple, and there is a giant snake, and Indy then fights it. Indy then battles this snake, picking up the tridents off the floor and throwing it at it while its mouth is open. And after a while, it slithers away quickly. Then after this, Indy ends up walking into another room and making his way to the top of the temple where he solves a puzzle with Gina. Then after this, the temple then collapses, right as Indy realizes that the map that they uncover actually shows the way to the stone. Then after this, the temple then crumbles and Indy gets into another fight with Locust. And then after this, Indy ends up winning against Locust, and the snake comes over again, and the two of them temporarily work together to kill the snake. Then after this, Indy and Locust then fight again. I was fully expecting the snake to eat Locust the first time I saw that scene, but however, I did not expect Locust to defeat the snake. Well, anyways, Locust and Indy then continue to fight, and Gina ends up telling them that Voss is expecting them to fight, and while they're too busy fighting, they will have the stones stolen from them. Then after this, Indy then knocks Locust out, and Gina gets upset at him for it. Then after this, they then leave the temple and went to the last temple that they would need to go to, in Sukhothai. Then after this, they then head to the Sukhothai temple, and Indy ends up performing lots of interesting puzzles, one of which involves Indy doing a massive board game and solving a massive board game puzzle that was like the one that he did in the previous temple. Then after this, Indy ends up going into a room full of water that is infested with leeches, and Indy ends up going through and making it safely to the other side. Then following this, Indy ends up going into a pit, and at the bottom of the pit is the chamber with the stone. And Indy ends up working his way down the shaft to get to the stone, and he ends up getting into the chamber with the stone. Then after he takes it, the temple collapses, and Indy then needs to escape as the temple floods. Then after this happens, he encounters Locust again, and the three are forced to work together when Voss comes over and tries to kill all three of them. Then after this, in another interesting sequence that was similar to the plane one, Indy, Gina, and Locust have to escape the enemies while all fighting back against them. And this whole chase sequence ends with Gina being kidnapped and taken to a rock. Then after this, Indy and Locust then head over to a rock Then following this, they then head into a temple. Locus's friends then show up, and all of them begin to fight. And after a while, Indy ends up freeing Gina, and they end up going into the temple together, realizing that now Voss has all the stones, and we see Indy and Gina follow him into the cave, where Indy ends up sneaking into the Nazi camp, where he ends up finding Voss. Then after this, Voss ends up revealing the truth about what happened to Laura by sharing a recording, where Laura sacrifices herself, saying that Voss's experiment of testing the teleportation stone has failed, and she ends up saying that the captain wants her to take the stone and use it to get them back to safety, but however she refuses, saying that she would rather die with the stone than let him have it. And she ends it off by saying that she hopes he burns in HE double sticks. Well, anyways, I really like this sequence as it shows that Laura's death was a sacrifice, or she did not want Voss to get the stone. And it also shows that Laura really, really hated Voss. And it makes sense as he is a very hateable character. He's up there with some of the most evil Indiana Jones villains. Well, anyways, after this, Voss ends up revealing his plan. He ends up revealing that, the story about the stones and telling the story of the stones to Indy, and then after this, he ends up revealing Noah's Ark. That Noah's Ark is in this cave. Then the next day, Indy, Locus, and Gina are all trapped on Noah's Ark as Voss ends up revealing his crazy evil plan. He ends up revealing that inserting all 17 stones into the wheel of the Ark would give him the power to teleport anywhere in the world in an instant, which would be very, very powerful for him, as it would allow him to take out pretty much anybody. Which I will admit, that is a pretty good MacGuffin. It may not be as powerful as other stuff like transformation or time travel, but I still do think that teleportation is pretty good. And to be fair, both of those were already done in previous Indiana Jones games and movies. Speaking of which, I might review the other Indiana Jones games as well, depending on how many views this one gets. But if this video does well, maybe I will. Well, anyways, if you have made it this far, comment down below which Indiana Jones game you would like to see me review in the future. Well, anyways, we end up seeing Indy and Gina free themselves, and after this we end up seeing Voss put all 17 stones in. However, instead of getting the teleportation he hopes he'll receive, instead, the Great Flood returns and the whole Earth floods. However, after this, Voss ends up getting really, really angry at Indy, Locus, and Gina, blaming them, saying that they must have hijacked his plan and did something to make it where this would happen instead, even though the three of them did nothing. And while we end up getting a fight sequence where Indy and Voss end up fighting each other, while Locus and Gina battle other men in the background who are fighting alongside Voss. And after a while, we end up seeing Indy beating Voss, and Voss ends up losing to the battle. And while at first I thought that this would be the end, but then after this, they throw in another sequence where Indy and Voss were hanging off the side of the Ark, where one last fight occurs. Then after this, we then see Voss die. Then after Voss dies, Locus then takes control of the Ark and then begins to navigate it through a portal. And he ends up telling Gina and Indy to jump off, and they do so. And while after the portal opens, Locus ends up driving the Ark and the Flood through the portal. And that's the last time we see Locus. We never understand what happened to him after that. Anyways, after this, Indy and Gina end up washing ashore onto an island, where we end up seeing the two of them talk before they leave. And even they explain that they're curious about what happened to Locus. But however, it is left a mystery. Maybe we'll get a sequel explaining it, I don't know. Or maybe it will be explained in the DLC or something. Well, anyways, after this, in the epilogue, we end up seeing Gina and Indy leave each other and tell each other goodbye. Then we see Gina get onto a plane as Indy walks away, and that's when the credits. So that was Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I really like the story. It gets a 8 out of 10 for me. Alright, now let me talk about the gameplay. Now, I know I didn't get absolutely everything in this game. There are still some side quests. But however, you don't just need to play the side quests to enjoy the story, similar to other games such as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild or The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. There are so many really, really, really fun sequences in this game. I really, really like it. The gameplay gets a 10 out of 10 for me. Graphics. And editing and special effects. Actually, not really special effects, as the whole thing's animated. This game looks visually stunning. This is one of the most visually stunning games I've ever played. Everything looks real. In fact, this game has the second best graphics I've seen in any video game. I will give the graphics a 10 out of 10. Best graphics of any Indiana Jones game, in my opinion. Okay, now the acting. This game has the second best acting I've seen of any video game. The acting for all of the characters is great. Indy sounds like Indy from the original movies, and all of the characters sound great. There are no takes that I dislike. I will give the acting a 10 out of 10. Okay, now here's the conclusion. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a great video game. It absolutely deserved to win the Game of the Year award for 2024. This game was absolutely amazing. I might play the DLC in the future. I highly recommend this game, and I really, really hope that it gets a sequel. Maybe even like a third game too. Well, anyways, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle gets a 10 out of 10. It's not the best Indiana Jones game. I still think that title goes to Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. But however, it still is a great game. If you haven't checked this game out, what are you waiting for? You absolutely should, as this game is amazing. I cannot recommend it enough. Well, anyways, guys, I'm GamerC. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.